Your mics are on. Meeting started. You can call us to order anytime.
All right, I'd like to.
Oh, well, the first thing we have is applicant interviews, and then you would call us to order.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
So we're gonna have our applicant interview with Christopher Weaver here first. So come on up.
Speaking to the mic, I presume?
Yeah.
All right.
So we got 5 questions, is it?
Yep.
And 4 are kind of preset, and the 5th is other questions from the committee. So you guys can divvy those up amongst yourselves.
Sure. I'll kick it off.
Sure.
I'm Trent. Please tell us why you're interested in serving on the Natural Resource Committee.
Well, I've been a resident of Oregon City now for about 5 years. In that time, I've pursued a career in landscape architecture. And I'd like to think it's partly because I was inspired by just what I've found here in this community. There's so much natural and geological diversity. It's just very inspiring. And I just really wanted to, really contribute more, just as a citizen, in addition to just in a professional capacity.
Cool. Well, thank you for that.
Yep.
What's your background in natural resources?
My background in natural resources, well, it's very recent. I have a master's in landscape architecture. And I've been a landscape designer with the firm Greenworks for about 4 months now. My career is very nascent, but I'd very much like to hit the ground running. Before that, I have some background just in GIS and college coursework related to the matter. In addition to that, just in a grassroots capacity, I've always participated in some way, shape, or form in citizen science or just volunteerism. I volunteered for 4 years with Willamette Riverkeepers, doing water quality testing on the Pudding River. That was before I discovered landscape architecture. It was just, I knew it was in the vein of my interest. So I was lucky to have found a more concentrated route.
Have you previously served on an appointed advisory committee or board?
No. Plainly no.
You go by Chris or Christopher?
Chris is good.
Okay.
Okay. Are there specific projects that you feel the Natural Resource Committee should pursue? And would you answer change if there were budget? Would you, excuse me? Would you answer change if there were budget constraints? I guess I'm not sure the written question here, but what would your actual position change if there were budget constraints?
I should first just come clean and say that I'm not actually aware of what projects are currently on the horizon, so it's kind of hard to comment on whether I would actually kind of constrain my own views on the matter. But generally, as far as prospects to be addressed by the committee, I would say ecological improvements just in the spaces that we have that don't involve property acquisitions of any kind. I think that there's a lot that we could do to kind of strengthen the natural habitat just in our parks and open spaces. Things that have already actually kind of been launched in places like Kanema, where we've removed some of the Climax Doug fir forest and actually kind of reseeded for upland prairie. I'd like to see more of that kind of in a continuation all the way down the river so that we can actually have a contiguous habitat, that sort of thing.
And if the funding wasn't an issue, what would you do? Funding is always an issue.
Yes. Well, hard to say. I've never actually been faced with the dilemma. I would probably defer to my superiors in that matter and look for leadership.
I guess, yeah, so we're here kind of on the other questions that might come up. My one question is, what in your past experience in landscape architecture, volunteering, anything like that, an example of something you've done that would really apply to a committee, or like something that the committee might address or endorse, or I mean, just something that you can relate, I guess, that really pops in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, professionally, I'm usually kind of on the other side of things, or at least I'm poised to be on the other side of things. I work mostly in production and planning. I don't deal directly with advisory committees and the public, but I'd like to really gain more of an understanding just of the perspective, because I know that I am going to be, the consulting professional in the future, and I just want to be able to come at it from all sides.
I just noticed we had the honor of our parks maintenance person in charge of park maintenance coming in. We've got a lot of, and you mentioned Kanema, we've got a lot of natural areas in our park. Some of them are just parts of the park, and others it's basically mostly a natural area. Have you had a chance to visit the, say, city-owned natural resources that we do have?
Mill Creek Canyon, I would say, would be one. As best as I could. Access is a bit of an issue, but it's always just been a point of curiosity for me. That and the trail systems going throughout the town and connecting over into Westland. Tried to really explore as much as I can.
Great. Anybody else? Anything else?
Is there a particular area of natural resources that interests you the most?
I would say probably resilience planning for climate change. I'm expecting within my lifetime that we're going to see some major shifts as to what types of communities can actually be supported here in the Willamette Valley. So just looking ahead and thinking, how can we plan for that accordingly? How can we actually design these communities to stand in the face of that and actually thrive?
We have a comprehensive plan update process that's going to start for the next 2 years, so we'll be discussing that very thing as part of all of those goals. And so that's great.
Excellent.
Thank you. Any other?
Yeah, no, anybody else have any questions?
Good.
Okay. Well, we appreciate your time tonight, Chris.
Great.
Talking with you, yeah.
All right, so the
Thank you all very
way
much.
it will work is the Natural Resources Committee will provide a recommendation to the mayor, and the mayor alone will make an appointment. And he may want to talk to you individually as well, so we'll sort out a time and for him to do that if he wants to do that. Otherwise,
Excellent.
he might just take whatever recommendation comes forward from the NRC. Yep.
Great.
Okay.
I really appreciate it, guys.
Yeah,
appreciate
no, it's
your
good.
time.
Good
All
talking
right,
with
yep,
you.
thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Chris. All right.
All right, I'd like to call to order the Natural Resource Committee on November 13th, 2019. Get a euro ahead of my head.
And there's a staff request to put item 4B before item 4A.
Okay, that works. Problem with
Anything
that?
else you care to do?
No, yeah, we can do that.
Okay, great. Thanks. And I don't have any public comment cards for items not on the agenda. So we can move on to old business as you when you're
Okay,
ready.
sorry, so, yeah, no public comments, old business. Or going off with so which one, I thought you said you wanted to move something?
Yeah, so the first thing we'd like to discuss is, because Laura's here, is Willamette River Green.
Oh, okay, yeah, so we'd like to.
Yeah, and I've got a presentation that we'll key up here.
All right. Thank you very much. Laura Turway, Community Development Director, City. Good to see you. I am here just to chat a little bit about some proposed code amendments. I know you talked about them a little bit, but we didn't give you a lot of context before about the history of Willamette River Greenway. And so we are here to do that tonight. There's a draft of the code amendments circling around as well. These amendments have been through Planning Commission at the City Commission level. They're part of our bigger package of code amendments. As you recall, we rewrote lots of sections of our code that became effective on August 2nd, and this is that follow-up. So as a part of the follow-up, we're doing any cleanup amendments, but also we took a look at the Willamette River Greenway and realized there's some places where we can add a lot of clarity to our code where we don't have it. And so that's why we're looking at these amendments tonight. The timeline for these code amendments moving forward is that we'll be asking for City Commission approval on December 4th. So we're coming up close to the time when we're asking for adoption. The NRC doesn't have to make a recommendation. You can make a recommendation, but your feedback is certainly much appreciated. We want to make sure that when we do these code amendments, we get it right, because who knows when we will amend them again. A lot of our Willamette River Greenway code came from some standard code that was adopted a long time ago. So we are doing, think of surgical editing and not rewriting the whole code, just the real bad parts. Okay, so there's a statewide planning goal 15, Willamette River Greenway, and its goal is to protect, conserve, enhance, and maintain the natural, scenic, historical, agricultural, economic, and recreational qualities of lands along the Willamette River as the Willamette River Greenway. It's a really long sentence, and that's a lot of stuff in a sentence, to protect all of those things. So from my understanding, the evolution of this goal is sort of a pushback to when you saw a lot of industrialization next to the river and people lost access and things like that as well. Willamette Falls is sort of an example of that, a lot of downtown Portland too. And so we want to make sure that we protect both from the river looking up, but then also looking towards the river as well. The state law requires that we review development within 150 feet of the river, but you'll see through this presentation that we actually do a lot more than that. We're not proposing to amend the boundaries of the overlay district, just some of the language. So the map is going to stay as is. You can see that it covers Kenema, and then also it covers a lot of our land close to the river, a lot of our park lands as well. Clackamas River, when the master plan happened, they went through a type 3 review for this to look at the impacts of those proposed restrooms and docks and things and its impact on the river. So we comply with state law or the state goal through the adoption of Chapter 1748, the Willamette River Greenway in our code. It sets out a full process, and it's similar to Natural Resources Overlay District as well, which you're much familiar with. So basically, it has levels of review. Some review is a type 3, which is reviewed by the Planning Commission, and some is a type 2. So the ones that are type 3 that require a public hearing and Planning Commission review are those within the compatibility boundary, which is that 150 feet. So basically, state law says we need to regulate the land within 150 feet. So we said if you're within 150 feet, that requires Planning Commission review. So it talks about that the greatest extent possible development or change or intensification of use provides the maximum possible landscaped area, open space, vegetation between the activity and the river. So can we create a space or a buffer? Or can we move whatever disturbance is proposed back away from the river? And then the next thing that we look at is there public access that needs to happen to the greatest degree possible? Necessary public access is provided to and along the Willamette River by appropriate legal means. There's some legal stuff that happens with us trying to get exactions for people to get to someone's property. So in order for the public to walk on someone's property to the river, it's a little bit, there's a lot of layers there. But the general idea between the overlay district is that development is pushed back from the river. It's maybe not as tall, not as close. It's minimized at some point. And then if you want to do anything else within the overlay district, it's that's more than 150 feet from the river, that is reviewed as a staff level. There's still a public comment period and opportunity for people to talk about these criteria, but there's no public hearing. Both of those decisions can be appealed to the city commission as well. Let me tell you a little bit more about the requirements. And again, here's a picture of the park, which did go through review. So again, access is a big thing. If you look at the criteria in the Willamette River Greenway, they're not exactly clear and objective. They're a little bit discretionary. Like, when is adequate public access? What meets that standard? And how do we have the ability to get that from people? Protection and safety. So it talks about safety of public and private property, and from vandalism and trespassing to the maximum extent possible. Very discretionary there. So again, you're seeing that when I get to the code amendments, we're doing surgical amendments. For most of this is this basic code that was adopted a long time ago, and it's, for the most part, unchanging. And then the more important part is the vegetative fringe, so we want to make sure that we maintain some vegetation next to the water. We know that we also have a natural resource overlay district that also applies, and it requires a vegetated corridor, which is also a vegetative fringe next to the water. So you're kind of seeing these two requirements overlapping for the same purpose as well. Directing development away from the river, we talked about that. So rather than putting a building, if you have a piece of property that's on the water, can you put the building further away from the water rather than really close to the water? Or could you orient it in a specific way that is helpful to minimize its impact so that the public, say, driving by on the street side on one side, couldn't see past your building or next to your building to see towards the water? And then the greenway setback, which is similar to the vegetative fringe as well. So try and stay away from the river. There's a couple of proposed code changes. There's three major things. One is we're adding to the list of exemptions in the Willamette River Greenway. There are minor things that have no need for a Willamette River Greenway review. So, for example, wall signs. Or if you're not building within the compatibility boundary and you're just doing exterior changes. So if you're putting up an awning or adding a door or a window, if you're not within 150 feet of the river and you're adding a door or window, seems like it should not apply because you're really not going to change the impact from the river. It's too far away. And then for commercial, multifamily, industrial, any changes to landscaping or parking that are more than 100 feet away from the ordinary low, those are exempt because, again, you're either planting plants or changing plants, and then you're just changing the orientation of parking lots within parking stalls within a parking lot. It's really not going to make any visual difference for the sake of the river. And then any review that's subject to a type 1 site plan, again, those are minor things that are non-discretionary. You can add a window, you can add a door, you can add an awning or something like that. And so since if those are entirely outside the compatibility boundary, which is that 150 feet, then they ought not to apply to the greenway. The next is single family and two family residential. So we want to make clear that any changes to landscaping or a driveway or any exterior modifications or accessory buildings or something like that really isn't going to impact. If you're up in Kenema up the hill, if you build a driveway, that's really not going to make a big difference from the river. Not going to be able to see it well from the river, and you're not blocking any views or anything like that. So those are that's the biggest part of these code amendments, is we realize that our code doesn't have all these exemptions for things that it should have. Then the next one is there was some conflicting language about how to process these things. It had a bit of a process built in, and then it referenced our general 1750, which is our administrative procedures code. And so it did both things, and both things weren't the same thing. So we are just referencing our administrative procedures code. And then the other big thing is that there was a standard in here that did not allow residential structures greater than 35 feet. And you could do any other structure greater than 35 feet. It was silent on mixed use because I'm sure when it was created, that wasn't a big thing that was being developed at the time. But it seemed rather arbitrary. We believe that this may have been created back when the historic districts were coming online, or right before the historic districts were coming online. And since then, we now have protections for Kenema through our historic overlay district. So the building height and massing is reviewed through the historic district and doesn't really need to be reviewed through the Willamette River Greenway. Also, we identify need for housing and for types of housing. So if you have multifamily and some of these zoning designations, you may want to be 35 feet or taller. And so we didn't want to put this arbitrary cap on multifamily for no particular reason. We have a comprehensive plan, and as you all know, it mentions the Willamette River Greenway, and it talks about preservation of views, protection of fish and wildlife, which happens through these vegetative corridors and these setbacks that we impose through both NROD, but also the Willamette River Greenway as well. That's it. That was sort of a lot in a short amount of time, but really the code amendments. So the purpose of the Greenway is to protect the river and to protect ourselves from ourselves in the future so that we still can engage with the river, both when we're in the river looking up or up looking down at the river as well. And so it's primarily looking at how do we maintain access, vegetation, and move things away from blocking the river. The code amendments themselves are this list of things we're exempting, as well as removing the prohibition on residential structures greater than 35 feet in height, which is missing from that slide, and then also just an administrative cleanup. Do you guys have any questions or comments on this? Yes.
I've got one. The one stream that we have going into the Willamette River that is an anadromous fish-bearing stream is Abernathy Creek. And I know that the ODOT has sought, I think, construction easements and so forth to go onto the I-5, and that culvert is right adjacent to that particular location. I don't know what might be happening in terms of their work in that culvert space, but and it's not tied to the code really, but or maybe it is. But to what degree will Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife be looking at that I-5 bridge improvement with respect to any impacts that they are going to have on the culvert itself?
That's a good question. I think there's outstanding questions if they want to change that culvert a little bit through work with Wes as well. That will need lots of review. The freeway project or expansion of I-5 we'll need a whole list of reviews from the planning department, so you'll see it. You'll probably end up you'll probably get a presentation for it also, because it's, will likely be a type 3 natural resource overlay district. So we will go through all of our notification channels. We have a provision in the Natural Resources Overlay District that you have to contact other applicable agencies. I assume ODOT will contact other applicable agencies because they're doing some in-water work, so we'll need a joint permit application through the Corps and other things. So yes, they should be getting permits through them as well, or looping them in through that process. Did I answer your question?
I think so. It's just,
Uh-oh.
I mean, it's something we know is coming forward, and of course it is in the overlay district, and I just was wondering basically whether we'll be involved in the process.
The problem is that I don't have all of the details yet. We worked on it conceptually, and so the plans weren't at the level of specificity that we needed to be at to give them a lot of guidance. But from what I know, I would be highly surprised if it didn't come before you. Yeah. And before the Planning Commission also. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
If you have any, do you have any comments more to add to the City Commission, or you want us to convey anything? Okay.
I don't have anything, no.
Thumbs up. All right.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
That was 4B.
Yep.
So next is the staff
The
report.
next one is 4A, which is,
Oh, I see, okay.
we discussed this at the last meeting, but, and we had some initial input on habitat in the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan. We wanted to come back and revisit that and clarify a few other things. So Christina Robertson Gardner is here to present.
Thank you, Pete. As you recall, when I made the presentation in October, just to give a overview, the Planning Commission is going through hearings for the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan zoning and code amendments. The concept plan was adopted in 2008, readopted in 2016, and now the planning staff's job and Planning Commission is to take a 60-page narrative document and turn it into code and rezone properties that are inside the city limits, but right now hold county zoning because this plan has not been implemented. And as we move through the process, we've been looking at the adopted plan and our existing city codes and what needs to be amended specifically for this area. And one item that I brought up at the October meeting was overlaying our natural resource overlay district boundaries, our geologic hazard boundaries, looking at our 1741 tree protection code, as it relates to upland habitat areas that were identified in the plan, and those are identified in those orange areas in the adopted plan. And actually, the next slide is this map of kind of overlaying it, and I identified 4 areas, areas 1, 2, 3, and 4, where I saw I saw either a little bit of mismatch or a fair amount of mismatch. And so when I made the presentation in October, I was relaying the information that the Planning Commission felt that the existing overlay codes, overlay zones substantially implemented the concept of upland habitat, and the difference on balance was okay because they're balancing economic development concerns as well. What I heard from the Natural Resource Committee in October that you wanted to see a little bit more code for these upland habitat areas. And as we moved forward on the process, I realized the best way to kind of bring your comments in is I can submit them to the Planning Commission and then get their direction to see what additional code may be. So my goal tonight is I actually wrote some draft memo that you'll see on your desk and on the dais. And generally, it is trying to recap what I just mentioned, what I heard from the October meeting, which is you feel that additional code should be written to address upland habitat areas adjacent to natural resource and water features. Amendment to water, abutting protected water features. We don't have to write code this evening, so don't worry, I'm not putting you on the spot. Which I think everyone's happy about. But so what this is an introductory memo that just kind of states your intent and your wish, and that you would like to work with staff. I added the 2 maps I just showed on the PowerPoint, but what I'd like from this evening is if there's additional specific comments you want to add to this memo, I can add to the memo as well. If there's any, you want to talk about any of the specific of the 4 areas, and we can bring up Google Maps again. And if you want to keep it vague, that's fine. If you want to add specific comments, I can do that. And then this memo I plan to submit into the record at the Monday Planning Commission meeting and try to schedule a future time to talk about it, and then work with Pete and looking kind of what if upland habitat protection is important, how best do we put that in the code? So I'm kind of open up for a general conversation, and I can type as we talk.
I recall from the previous meeting, Nancy brought in specifically, I think, the 2 pieces that were on the right that actually, I think, sort of abutted the water, the Thimble Creek watershed area. One thing I note is that the one on the left, further on the bottom there, actually seems to surround a stream segment. I presume it's not a perennial stream, but a stream segment that's actually is not culverted.
Which number?
That would be 3.
3.
No.
Or 2.
You're
must
looking
be.
at 2.
This
I
piece here?
think you're looking at 2.
Yeah, that's the one.
So 2 looks like.
Yes, that part is open, and then it goes into a culvert farther south.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that even though we're talking about upland overlays, I think it adds to the significance of that, given you have a stream that is actually going through it and it's not culverted.
Right. In that area, it doesn't have the benefit of the geologic hazard overlay, which areas 3 and 4 do. That really is just the natural resource overlay of the stream in any identified wetland in that little area. Actually, Pete, would you mind opening up Google Maps really quickly for that area? And I apologize.
Yeah, sure.
If we remember if I can remember, the area 1 and 2.
I think I was
2
talking
had a
about
lot
2.
more diverse.
I was talking about 2.
Yeah.
Of the 2 between 1 and 2, 2 had a lot more diverse tree canopy than 1, but we can.
I can't remember.
We can to kind of zoom in and we do a 3D view.
Is that,
Go down to the bottom right. Go on to. And then maybe do 3D.
Yeah.
Cool.
So if you're looking, 4 is probably farther down, right? We're pretty close to where Pete's. I'll do this. This is about area 4.
Yep.
So these were kind of swinging along right here. This is area 3, so a little bit, the geologic hazards kind of was like about right here. So this area looks like it was out of the geologic hazard protection.
I think that was
This was what
Yeah,
I
it's
think
like contiguous.
Doug was talking about. This is area 2, and then area 1 is this area right here. That is area 1. So I'm going to go back here just to, so area 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
I can go back.
you want to go?
So, I mean, I think that adds the significance of that particular one, the number 2, having that stream there.
How long a section of stream is it?
It shows on the map actually a culvert, it looks like it's culverted,
Oh, sorry.
on the north and south sides of that area, but not within the area itself. If I was looking at that, one map correctly, I guess it's the,
Oh,
Heading through here.
you can see it there, kind of.
Yeah.
Oh,
so I think it adds to the significance of that piece.
Is that piece protected because the stream is in it, or
Well,
just part
I
of it?
mean, it has some protection,
Right.
but it doesn't go out to that full canopy area. So if you look at the, going back to the map, you'll see, I'll see if I can zoom in. Hour of Zoom. This one. So if you'll see, there's some, so this shows a little bit of a wetlands, and then, once again, I don't think this is actually existing, I think this has been culverted.
Yeah.
But the tree area kind of comes down along here, so it's not all of it. So if development came in, all we would be able to protect is basically within the pink.
Right.
And then once again here, we could protect the pink, but the tree canopy goes a little bit lower, kind of around here. So if you have specific comments, I can take them. I'm here a little bit from two. If you don't have any additional comments, you just want to keep your comments vague. Basically, anything you think will be helpful to the Planning Commission tonight, I can incorporate into this memo.
I think it'd be good to know the area, especially for 1 and 2 of those little forested areas, if they could get like how much area is actually covered by that forest. But again, we need to protect the stream, so 2 may be more valuable. 1 looks pretty small, but again, without knowing how big those are, we don't really know.
Okay.
But I still think 3 and 4 are really important to protect because they are contiguous with a much bigger forested area than just what they're looking at protecting.
what did we estimate number 2 was? It was a couple acres, we thought,
Yeah.
outside of the top of the bank, potentially, or the entire contiguous canopy. We did a measurement about 3 weeks ago, so I'm a little fuzzy on it.
Right.
But I, just using OC Web Map, and I think it was close to about 2 acres, just drawing a circle around it. Mm-hmm. That'd be right,
I
right?
think so, yeah.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is areas 3 and 4 are the most important to protect as they're contiguous to large habitat areas. Area 2 is important as you have a stream intersecting it, and so adding additional canopy and habitat area to that buffer is important. And then looking into more information about area 1, just to see what really is left outside of that area. And look on balance, how can additional code be written to protect, knowing those 3 comments. Okay.
And then when is City Commission talking about this?
We don't know yet.
We don't know.
The next steps, we kind of every 2 weeks, Planning Commission takes topics. November 25th is all about transportation, so probably not going to talk about it on the 25th of November, which means we're probably in early December. And the reason why I think it'd be helpful to get this memo in is then it can kind of get staff kind of direction from the Planning Commission to start doing some research, and then I can share back draft code, and hopefully maybe we can have draft code available for the December NRC meeting.
Great.
Most likely we won't have a formal Planning Commission recommendation till the new year, and then the City Commission will be looking at the code amendments sometime after that. So, not super fast, but also not super slow. We're on a bit of a clip, but it's a legislative process, so there's not a time constraint on us if we need to slow down and do extra analysis.
Okay.
For me, real quick, just to catch up, so are all 4 of these areas outside of the geologic and the natural
So the
resource?
geologic hazard overlay is what you see in orange.
Okay.
Orange and red.
Okay.
The pink kind of MEBAs, I guess is is the Natural Resource Overlay District. So when you, the idea is to kind of take the Natural Resource Overlay District and the geologic hazards and kind of see where there's not overlap. And so that's where I identified those three areas.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
So what I'll do is I'll finish up writing these code amendment, this memo, I'll send it to Pete kind of before Monday. So if you see anything that is a wrong sentence or, I chose to use the wrong word, let Pete know and I'll make the amendment before Monday.
And then this presentation, can we make this available somewhere?
This presentation?
Yeah. Is it on the Planning Commission?
A link to it. I can provide a link to it on the Code Amendments website right now. And then Pete can provide a link to this PowerPoint, as well as the draft, the memo that I'll send.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That is all I have, and thank you very much for your direction.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll work on it right now.
All right. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Moving on to new business.
Okay. So next item on the agenda is preliminary discussion about the review process for tree removal on city-owned land. And there's a lot of attachments. These are the same exhibits that were provided to the City Commission in response to the swimming pool tree removal. And we also have John Waverly here from the Parks. He's our Parks Maintenance Superintendent. Talk about their considerations for what they do when they're managing trees. So I'm going to go through this brief presentation. We can circle back and talk about things. This is very preliminary. I have some questions at the end that I just want to bounce off you, and I'm going to be taking notes. I'm primarily here to listen and try to clarify things. And eventually, I think what we're going to be doing is coming together to develop some new policies and codes with respect to tree removal on city-owned properties. And we'll probably be talking about this with several other committees as well, including PRAC and the Planning Commission and the City Commission. And so you're the first committee to discuss this, I believe, as far as this portion of the review. So I'll get started. Thanks. And we do have some comments. So I'll leave it up to the chair when you would like to hear comments. I can give my presentation or however I handle it.
I don't have a.
Let's hear the presentation.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's hear the presentation first, and we can check that afterwards.
All right. So, and John, if you want to take a seat anytime, that's fine. So in your packet, there's a memorandum prepared by Tony Conkle, City Manager. And one of those documents is a summary and findings about the removal at the swimming pool and how that leads into a discussion of process improvements. And there are kind of 6 bullet points that Tony discussed in that summary as far as how we could improve the process for review. I'm going to talk about the current process as well, but just want to refer back to this slide if we need to. first item was to, beginning with the Heritage Tree Code as a kind of a basis in terms of tree size and type, would that serve as an appropriate means to trigger additional review for further analysis of alternative methods to retain healthy trees? And second item was we would be reviewing, we've already done this to a certain extent in the code as far as allowing the city engineer to make modifications to public improvement standards. But we'd be reviewing the Public Works sidewalk standards in particular, which is a set of specifications and standard drawings that are engineering documents to determine which alternative construction types and sidewalk rerouting types would be acceptable to achieve this. I also want to talk about determining when and how a public notification process would be triggered for this based on this new analysis. And already the various departmental staff have been updated on the current code requirements, but we'd also be talking to these departments if we develop new policy and having their input on this to reflect current code. And then we'll have within the departments an internal review process to make sure that everybody is following the correct procedures. And then we anticipate that there'll be a lot more input from not just Parks Department staff, but Public Works, because we have street crews who are out there. We have stormwater maintenance crews and water facility crews that are out there dealing with trees occasionally for maintenance issues. Currently, we have a review process for removal of trees on non-residential property, so that's going to be triggered if you have commercial property, mixed-use property, multifamily property, and public city-owned land property. Those are properties where the trees are growing on real estate that's not in the right-of-way. So we have a separate process for street tree removal in the public right-of-way, and we're not talking about that. It'll probably come into play at some point too, but right now we're talking about the on-site process that we have. And we require what is called a Type 1 minor site plan and design review permit for landscaping changes. And sometimes those landscaping changes involve removal of trees from a formally landscaped area like a parking lot, or formerly landscaped area around a building, those kinds of things which are regulated. And then we're dealing with, sometimes we just tree removal on properties that don't have as formal landscaping. And so depending on which one you are, we have an addendum that goes with that plan. The one that I'm showing here is our standard, our addendum 4B tree removal. And what it covers is where's the property, who's the owner. It has to have either a landscape architect prepare the plan or a certified arborist come up with a plan for removal and mitigation. In this case, it's based on clear and objective criteria in the code and a mitigation table. And there is no public notice associated with this sort of permit right now. And so just so we can refer to the Heritage Tree Code, which was just updated, this is the table that it doesn't, what this table does is talk about tree species, and several tree species in particular of a certain size, but it also talks about eligibility of trees that are either coniferous or broadleaf. It can be at least, if they're at least 20 inches in diameter, then they would be eligible. If a tree growing on city-owned property fell into one of these categories and was otherwise healthy, then that's the sort of thing I think we're talking about, but we'd like to get your feedback on that. And as a starting point for this process. And diameter breast height means measuring the trunk diameter at 4.5 feet above the ground. That's a standard measurement. as far as who is responsible for maintaining trees, property owners are responsible for street trees abutting the property, and that includes city-owned property. So if you have street trees abutting storm ponds, city-owned land, and that kind of thing, city is a property owner, and we would follow that public tree code for that. And then, as I just mentioned, commercial, public, and multifamily on-site trees. The Parks and Recreation Department maintains trees on city-owned parkland and in trails, and that's like the cemetery, the library, the Pioneer Center, and the trail area around the Cove, as well as others. Public Works Department has kind of a more confined role. They principally are involved in maintaining trees within storm ponds, and there are some natural resource overlay district tracts that are city-owned that the Public Works Department maintains, and they're principally involved in making sure that any hazard trees are taken care of and replaced in that situation. And then the Planning Department just issues permits. So we will review public land tree permits as well as street tree permits, and then minor site plan and design review permits as well.
Could I come back to the property owners here?
Yeah.
I know it applies. There are things like parking strips and so forth.
Right.
Are there other examples of trees?
Technically, any tree growing adjacent to a property, it could be in an alleyway as well, and it's a volunteer tree that's growing there, but we treat that as a street tree as well. We have some unimproved rights-of-way, and those are, a lot of times those unimproved rights-of-way are growing in a geologic hazard overlay zone. That's why they're not improved. You know, they don't go all the way through because of a slope or something like that. The property owner is responsible for those. So there's really I think that we need to do a better job of reaching out to property owners to educate them about the fact that it's not just the trees that are formally planted and the planter strips that are responsible for, but they're also responsible for the ones that are occasionally in the back if they have two frontages on an alley, for example, or in those situations where they have streets on both sides. We call that a double frontage lot. And some of the older subdivisions, like along Myers, where they have a 6-foot fence between the rear yard of the property and Myers Road, and there's a street tree there, well, technically the property owner is responsible for that street tree. And so those are the kinds of situations where it's important to educate and take care of those trees as well. Yeah. Oh, wrong mouse. Yeah. And so the Parks Department had some conversations with John earlier today, and I just wanted to throw up some of their considerations. Now, for the Parks Department, they maintain a lot of trees and a lot of parks, and there's some of those parks are within the Natural Resource Overlay District, and then some of them aren't. They're principally concerned with taking care of dead, diseased, dying, and hazardous trees, and that's where they spend a lot of their time pruning and removal and those kinds of things. There's obviously a very important public safety aspect to that. They're very intent on keeping the canopy healthy, and they love healthy trees, and they love trees in general. That's why we're involved in various efforts to do replanting in the parks and that kind of thing. Some additional considerations that are dynamic are, you know, the influx of certain types of invasive trees, invasive tree species like the tree of heaven, that one, and there's 3 or 4 others, including the the cherry laurel and holly and several other invasive trees like that. So we've written in some exemptions in the Natural Resource Overlay District to allow those trees to be removed without type 2 Natural Resource Overlay District review and that kind of thing. The Parks Department does operate on a very tight budget, and they have very long backlog of maintenance on existing parks, so it's always a consideration of staffing and cost. And John can probably speak to that a little bit more too. And then there's other things going on. So we have habitat, beaver habitat along the cove, and the beavers will chew through the cottonwoods. And, you know, that's something something where we have to manage the habitat at the same time that we're managing public safety. And then we have the emerald ash borer, which
that
is
here?
moving westward slowly. It's not here yet.
It's not here yet?
No. So,
Thank God.
John, you were telling me a little bit about that earlier today. So there's some considerations on the horizon where we anticipate having to replace trees on a pretty large scale, right, John? Yeah.
Yeah, so what I was telling Pete was just that, like, as new parks are being brought online or new trees are being brought in, for example, the Tyrone Woods Memorial Park, actually, we received the tree list and it had ash trees on it. So we made sure to have those trees replaced with a different varietal. No, the ash borer is not here, but when it does come, and it will, it's going to be pretty devastating. So anything that we can do ahead of time, possibly thinking about replacing, avoiding those varieties and new plantings, all of that I think will put us in a better place moving forward.
I've got kind of a separate question. The one that comes into mind is is on the trail, and you've got the asphalt trail there in Cedar Creek Park that goes up a fairly steep slope. And I noticed the tree roots are lifting that asphalt out. I mean, what do you do when you have those problems that you would not end up injuring the roots in the process?
Yeah, I mean, we run into tree root situations like that quite frequently. Some of the times, if the tree roots are small enough, we can cut the root if it's under 30% or less. Some instances, it depends on the upheaval as well, on how great the upheaval is. So creating a trip hazard, we've ramped up asphalt so that it meets at a more even point. So we try to use every trick that we have in our toolbox to try to address them, try to minimize it, try to eliminate it. We're currently working on the Veterans War Memorial at the cemetery. We hold our Memorial Day events there. A lot of activity, a lot of people, and those large sequoias have a lot of surface roots. And so we just brought in an arborist to give us some possible solutions as we look to redesign the Veterans Memorial. How can we best approach the project and have as minimal of an impact as possible on those trees? So always just trying to figure out best case scenario for everything.
So my last slide is a set of questions for the NRC that we can refer back to after we've heard the public comment. But they are, in general, is the Heritage Tree Code is suitable as a trigger for further analysis? Or what other additional considerations should we use when we're talking about alternative methods to retain healthy trees? What type of public notice are we talking about? Are we talking about signs directly on trees or on the property where the trees are? Is that the best way to notify people that there's a pending removal and there's a way to educate through that process, and then a contact and point of contact, that kind of thing? What kind of information do we want to include on that notice? And how do we balance that noticing with staff time and resources? What alternatives should be considered to avoid removing an otherwise healthy tree or trees that present a public safety risk? And who should the decision maker be? You know, there's a number of things where it kind of makes sense for the majority of the smaller trees or something that is a hazardous situation where it's clearly documented and it can be handled through a type 1 review over the counter, that kind of makes sense. But obviously there's a threshold at which the public should be notified and the decision maker goes to a higher level, whether that's the city manager with possibility for discussion or appeal to a higher body. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. And none of this is set in policy or code just yet. So, and there may be some additional questions and comments that you have in addition to these. Yes, Doug.
One thing that I had mentioned before, when a developer came into, I presume it's the Westling Farms area, and there was this one great, beautiful white oak that's there, and they actually diverted the sidewalk to give it plenty of space. But I don't think any of our development codes required. I assume maybe the developer did it
Volunteered
on their own. And my question is, where we find trees that meet these, and I'm just saying the heritage trees, but maybe in the more general aspect, if we decide that this is a good basis of designating the trees in general, whether development codes, when you see those kinds of trees in the development, whether in fact the developer can be constrained in that sense of actually doing something like that.
Right. So fleshing out the tree protection code to actually require it as opposed to just encouraging it. I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then combining that with a combination of alternative public works standards and that sort of thing. Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're talking about. You're talking about the same chapter of code, chapter 1741. That's a little broader discussion than we were intending to have with you tonight, but because we were principally talking about city-owned land. But I could see that on the horizon.
I mean, that would be future city-owned lands.
Right.
On the street.
Well, yeah, that's right. If there's an easement for a sidewalk, it's going to encompass that area, so it's going to become part of it, or it's a dedicated right-of-way. I think some of those are in actual easements. So it's either an access for sidewalk, and it's also an easement for tree protection potentially, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's a good point. Okay.
We've got 2 comments for public comments tonight. One from Dorothy Dalsrud and one from Denise McGriff. I'll let Dorothy go first. So you're here first.
I look like a lumberjack today, don't I?
Got the flannel on.
Hi, my name is Dorothy Dalsrud. I just wanted to put my input in, and I'm glad you brought up the subject about curving sidewalks and curving trees. Or curving sidewalks and curving roads. I'm currently collecting every single picture I can find in cities, and a lot of cities are curving and using them as ways to actually slow down traffic in neighborhoods, because the sidewalks are now curving out and protecting the trees. And they're also curving into people's properties, where the sidewalks will curve into a piece of property to save the tree. And I'm noticing this in Canby, Molalla, Oakland, California. I found five examples walking down the street. So I'm just trying to encourage that we do build around our trees as much as possible. You can build dang right up next to an oak, and it won't hurt the oak if you're just a little bit careful, and that is very important. As far as our city trees, I'm very, very concerned about I'll just stick with oaks for right now, just because I have to stay within my 3 minutes. On Lynn Avenue, there were 7 oaks, now there's 5. the 5 Oaks that are adjacent onto that property right now to a lovely church, but they really find those trees to be a burden. They could give a hill of beans if they give down. There's a lovely, lovely oaks. How do we protect the trees that are city-owned trees that the adjacent neighbors really don't even care? They find them to be a nuisance because they feel that they're already a burden, and they're not really. They're just there. And they do have to be pretended, take care of them. But how do we protect those trees if we have no one to sign off for them? That's something I think that you ought to consider. The city saying, yeah, we're going to protect them anyhow, whether the adjacent property owner is not, because we own those trees, or we're stewards. We don't own them. They were here way before us, and they'll be here way after us because they can live 1,000 years. And I also really like the one suggestion that Dan Holliday said. Why don't we at least start with a 50-year-old tree? You can look at, and especially a native, you can look and measure a tree very quickly and age a tree. And if it's somewhere around 50 years or older, well, I'll have to stop and contemplate that one. I thought that was just a very good basis suggestion. And I'll stand behind that one and give it a round of applause. Thank you very much.
I guess the question I would have is
Yeah.
that and to actually age the tree is sometimes problematic. You don't want to take a core of it, so forth. But what's the problem with actually using the diameter as an indicator?
That's how you do it. And you can actually have an application on your phone that you just go over, measure the diameter, click on a down drop of the type of tree, click on the diameter in either centimeters and or inches, and either circumference and or diameter, and it will automatically age the tree for you within 10%. Or you can do the old version and measure it and divide it by pi and then times it by the growth rate, which those lists are all over the internet too. I can give you 15 growth rates right now. We can put those growth rates on our own websites if we wish to. We can put a link to that. Do it yourself, download your app on our websites. I'd encourage us to make our heritage. That's wrong subject. I will stop there. But anyway, that is something that we could very easily do, is to age a tree. Encourage getting our Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts out there just doing it. When people know the age of a tree, it's mind-boggling, because you think a tree's 100 years old and it'll turn out to be 300. You think a tree's 150 years old and you go, wow, that tree's only 65 years old? Wow, you can get that beautiful tree in 65 years? I need to plant 65 more. Anyway, those are some things I really encourage. That are simple little things that'll just make you stop, think, digest the thought. How can we save this? And if we don't have the money to save it, who do we look to? Look to your neighborhood associations. A lot of times, if you put it out and someone will sponsor a tree. They might want to put their name on it, but or an organization's name on it. But it would at least give one more link to say, yeah, that person might want to give that a doctoring. There's an incredible 300-plus-year-old tree in Park Place Park that needs some doctoring, and it should not die.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time,
Thanks.
Dorothy. Our next public comment comes from Denise McGriff. Welcome.
Good evening. I was just here last night. I'm Denise McGriff, and you know that I live in Oregon City. I just have a few comments for you with regard to this. Obviously, you're very aware that I know way too much about this particular issue. I'm not here tonight to throw anybody under the bus, and as you're aware, the commission had a robust discussion about this, and the question was how we needed to deal with it. I think, if possible, it might be, and I don't always recommend this, behoove you to look at the city commission meeting where this discussion occurred, because there are a number of suggestions. Number one, we talked about this applying to all publicly owned properties, not just city property. And that was one of the things that we did talk about. We talked about using the Heritage Tree Code as possibly a minimum. We also talked a lot about applying some incentives and maybe some disincentives. I know that's not part of your bailiwick, but I'm just throwing it out there. So what I want to talk about is in terms of comments, and I can come back with my private hat on and talk about some of those items there. But I think as Oregon City has been designated as a Tree City USA, we should be holding ourselves to a much higher standard, regardless of whether we were a tree city. But that means something to me. That means that we have standards, that we have policies, that we have things in our codes, and our city decision-making regarding trees should be with regard to how do we save trees? How do we preserve trees? How do we incentivize making sure that our community knows that we do value trees? And what I mean by that is that in the last probably 5 years, the neighborhood that I live in has been subject to a lot of what I call weekend chainsaw activity. And it's very discouraging to drive down a street where you know there was a tree and somebody has taken upon themselves to remove it. And there's not a lot Pete or Jonathan can do after the fact. It's just depressing that has continued to happen, and I know it happens in other neighborhoods. So I think one of the things that would be helpful is that while we referred this to you, and I'm not here speaking on behalf of the City Commission, I'm just telling you generally what I heard at the meeting and the notes that I took, that the City Commission referred this back to you all for your review. And I'm hoping that you can move this through the process as quickly as you possibly can so that we can have something in place in the very near future. I don't know what that is, but just as soon as you possibly can, because it is a critical issue. I know I got a comment from somebody that said we should be more concerned about X, Y, or Z than 2 trees that were taken down at the pool. Well, I can tell you, when your phone starts blowing up over the weekend and people are coming to your house to talk to you about stuff, your attention does get a little bit diverted on some issues. So I think just all in all that I appreciate the work that's been done by staff to date, and that we're going to move forward on this. And I think in summary that we as a city should err on the side of extreme caution. If it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and it probably is a duck, probably should delay any adverse decision. Now, I will tell you that yesterday I was made aware, not yesterday, but 2 weeks ago, that there may be some tree removal at the library. So I know that the city, it's because we've got 2 elms that have Dutch elm disease that are about ready to bite the dust. One of the things is, unfortunately, one of them has been infested with some sort of beetle, and we won't be able to save it. But I think the other thing that came out of this is that if we do have to remove a tree, and the wood's okay, that the wood is going to be reclaimed by the city, because we all own that wood. We all own those trees. So we should be able to get some use out of it. And it was mentioned by one of the commissioners that, gee, we've got a public works department that's going to need some stuff. We've got a police department, and it wouldn't be great to utilize that like we did at the library with some of the things there. So I'm just saying that we should continue to err on the side of caution. And if we think that it might cause some sort of kerfuffle, let's try to avoid having a kerfuffle, because I think when people are involved and they're knowledgeable about what's going on, there's less problems. But I did want to mention that if you happen to go down Rylance Lane, if you all know where that is, there is the historic William L. Holmes house, and some years ago there's a gigantic oak, and although I did not enjoy raking up all those acorns 2 weeks ago, there are probably more now, they were able to save the tree. It was causing problems with the sidewalk, and they were able to go around with some impervious pavers. And it's perfectly walkable, and it's an example that's been there for probably 5 to 10 years of where there was a major tree, and the city looked at it and said, yeah, you can do this. The property owners did not want to take the tree out. They wanted to preserve it because it does provide some great shade, but it goes around, and it goes into that property, but that's okay because they agreed to that. So there are many examples of how we can look at alternative methods for making sure we have public sidewalk wide enough for anybody that needs to use, including ADA accessibility and that sort of thing. So we've done it. we can continue to do it. And again, like I said, let's just err on the side of caution. It's just, I think this community is very, very concerned about trees. And I think that's been evident over the last few years with some tree removals that have occurred, not on public property, but on private property as well. So it's just kind of, and I know that a certain commissioner said that they did not want to implement a tree ordinance that applies to private property, but I think someday we will get there. So for now, we're just looking at public property, and that would include our friends at the county, maybe our friends at a water district. We don't know, but we'd like it to apply across the board to not just the city. The city's going to set the standard and the example, and so hopefully the other jurisdictions, when something goes on, they will look to us and say, oh, well, this is probably what Oregon City would like to have us do, and they will contact us. So that's all I have to add, unless you have some questions for me. And I'll just continue
I just want to say one thing for you and Dee Dee. 10 years ago, I replaced the sidewalk by my house that was falling apart. And I had a maple tree, and the city, when the sidewalk guy came out, he actually suggested that we make a curve in the sidewalk and the tree was little then. And
Yeah.
it's like, now I'm really glad I did that, because that tree's getting
And
bigger.
it's got room to grow there?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Well, that's great.
So I wanted to just say that the city does do that.
Yes.
On a regular basis. And I have a friend that have a huge oak, and the city curved the sidewalk when they put the sidewalk in, so.
Well, yeah, see, that's just great. That's
Yeah.
super. Thank you so much. And we'll look forward to seeing your work. And I'll probably be back.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. So it sounds as if the discussion at the city commission level was a little broader in terms of not just city-owned land, publicly owned land. And I think we're going to need to come back to you with some markups, so some initial concepts for code, and probably red lines. But before we do that, I just wanted to get your initial input. And we may be back before you December. I'm not sure how soon, and we'll actually have that, because there's a lot going on.
I'd be willing to help.
Yeah, that would
outside
be
of
great.
meetings too, so.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a real help having you look at the Heritage Tree Code.
Dee Dee helped me rewrite that.
And you too. Thank you. Yes. And any other questions or comments for me?
I guess, and we're going to be focusing on those that are publicly owned facilities and so forth. The notion that it could apply to other government entities, I think would be a good idea, but I'd be very reticent, at least at this time, to talk about what private property owners do to their land. I know I was extremely disappointed when the historic Huntley House, they cut down this beautiful Douglas fir that was there. And
Which house?
Huntley House is on Washington Street.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so important to educate the people about the Heritage Tree Code. When people buy a house and it has that designation, they recognize that they'll be inheriting the responsibility for that particular tree. And but for trees that are on existing owned properties, I'd be kind of reticent to tell them, no, what you have to do with your property.
I totally agree with you, Doug. I think, it's one thing to have a heritage tree code and have it managed on publicly owned property and stuff like that. But I have a lot of concern about dictating or coming up with code or rules that would say what publicly or privately owned ground could or couldn't do with their ground. So I think right now it'd be a good thing to kind of push this forward and say, let's get this program up and running, because I think how many heritage trees even before the code rewrite do we actually have in Oregon City?
Well, through that program.
So I think before we could really go down that road, I think we would need to really show how the program has worked in publicly owned ground before we could even go down that road.
I do have a question, and I thought about it when we were looking at the Heritage Tree Code and when I saw these, but maybe you could shed some light why we made the recommendation that we have, other than the specifically identified trees, higher diameters on other broadleaf species and other conifer tree species, and the ones that we identify, they're lower diameters. Was there a logic behind that? I don't.
It was mostly, we wanted to mostly protect native species.
Yeah.
And some of the native species, like Pacific dogwoods, a 5-inch Pacific dogwood is pretty old, really, because it takes them a long time to get there. But other tree species, we wanted to protect non-native trees, because there are a lot of ornamental trees that are also worth protecting, and some of those are fantastic specimens, but we set it higher because they're not native.
Yeah.
So that was what the 20-inch thing, and I've got a sequoia behind my house that's probably going to fall on my house, but it's planted next to the parking strip. It's literally, it's horrible. But I remember when it was planted, it's only been in, I think it's been in under 30 years, and it's,
Wow.
they grow, they're really weeds. So we wanted to at least put a 20-foot sequoia is like about 10 years old.
I'm wondering, I'm wondering, I'm not talking about changing the heritage tree thing,
Right,
but
right, but for
I'm
this-
thinking about, on what we're talking about, trees on public land, whether we would might want to have a diameter that's more in tune with the native species diameters that we've established here, and not apply necessarily to the heritage tree code. I don't.
I don't understand what, do you want to make them bigger or smaller?
Smaller for
Okay.
the roads. For the public.
We could get Dee Dee to get her program out and tell us what size white oak is, 30 years old.
Yeah.
Which is going to be small. Oaks take forever to grow.
Yeah.
And depending on where they're growing.
Yeah, that's the other thing. The apps are valuable for a general thing.
Yeah, very, very generalized, but it's not
yeah.
specific at all.
Yeah, that's really a
So that'd be the
not a good way to age trees.
I think we got a standard there on the heritage tree code. It makes sense for us to look at that as the basis. But I was wondering for the purpose of the publicly owned land, whether we'd want to reduce the diameter on the other species. That's a question.
Oh, I see. So other broadleaf or something. I think it's more important to protect the native species.
I agree.
Like the oaks and stuff.
Right, but on public lands, I think we should protect any mature tree that we have. Because if we cut it down and replace it, it's going to take some time for that replacement to create that shaded canopy and so forth on the streets. It's just a thought.
Right. I know what you're saying. That would be something
Yeah, I
to
think
consider.
that one's gonna kind of come down to. I guess I was thinking more like if they're planting new stuff, depending on what the species and stuff like that comes down to. Native is always gonna take the king in my book, but
Okay. Well, I could see potentially some form of this table or an amended table in chapter 1741 with similar diameter thresholds. And it'll say either city-owned or publicly owned land as a subsection heading, and it deals specifically with that process. We
might want to take the redwoods and leave them at 20 and make other conifers something smaller, because those grow so fast that, and yeah.
Yeah. So.
And I don't know if they're looking at the code, because I was reading the attachments that, you sent on the agenda, and about replacing the trees. It's the general replacement thing. So you're planting, they took down this huge oak and they're replanting a couple of little tiny things. And I know you can't put another huge oak in there because you can't transplant them that well, but it seems like maybe we should be, if they're taking a big tree like this out on public property, that they need to replant it with at least a bigger tree than what we're demanding the developers do.
Okay. Yeah, because right now, regardless of the diameter, if you have, right now it works like you have an arborist report, says it's dead, diseased, dying, or hazardous. It's removed from the mitigation calculation entirely.
Okay.
And there's no third-party review of that arborist report going on.
Okay.
other than, so it's the developer's arborist and it goes into the record
Right.
kind of that way. So potentially you have a higher third-party review threshold, a notification process for city-owned land situation.
Right, and
Yeah.
different replacement.
And different replacement,
Yeah,
right?
I-
Because,
yeah.
it, it could be completely hollow, but it's,
Completely hollow trees are very healthy a lot of the time.
Exactly. So,
I'm an ecologist, I'm a forest ecologist, come on.
I know, no, that's what
Dead
I'm
trees are
saying.
good trees, I don't know.
As long as, and then there's going to be a discussion about, is it a hazard and
Right.
what is the hazard? Is there a target? And this is what John deals with all the time.
Right.
Is, what is that public hazard and is there a way for the public to be notified and see all of the various parameters are being considered
Right.
prior to the decision being made?
And maybe, in some cases, could you do something to mitigate something? I don't know whether that
Right, is there a
could have been
decision?
saved, but the walnut was, and considering we're losing black walnuts at an alarming rate because of that blight,
Yeah.
because I've got one in my yard and it's still good, huh?
10,000 canker.
Yeah, I had to cut one out. I had two in my yard and I had to cut one down and the other one's still healthy, thank goodness. But, I mean, on the way I drive to work, I just watched 10 of them along Charbonneau Road get cut down, like a couple last year. And then this year, the other one started dying and there's like 2 left. And it used to be this huge row of, like Barlow House. That's just so sad.
All right.
So to cut down a black walnut that's healthy to me is just like, oh, because, yeah.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. We will go away and do some work and come back and show you what we've got.
Yeah, get a hold of me and I'm willing to sit down, help, or run it by me and I'll get back to you faster or something, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for the comments. All right, anybody else have anything else on that subject? All right, communications.
Okay, do you want to begin with member reports and then I'll chime in afterwards?
Sure. Doug, you got anything?
Well, today I attended Environmental Learning Center had a presentation in terms of the actual development of the Environmental Center and what they did. I was extremely impressed. The number of agencies that turned out to have participate in those discussions and their experiences with working in watersheds and so forth. Several government entities were there. A few watershed councils were represented. It was a great turnout. And they had a great deal of discussion. And they talked about the problems they had in terms of the restoration work that they've done and so forth. The one thing that I think came out from everybody that's involved was Water Environmental Services was there, and as Oregon City Public Works and various other organizations, is that when they do restoration work, they seek grant money to come in and do restoration work and so forth. Maintenance is a huge thing, particularly invasive maintenance and so forth, and suggesting that you need to build in 15% of your money in there for long-term maintenance, or you're going to do you're going to end up with almost the same thing that you faced to begin with. So I think any group, and if we seek funds too to do any restoration work, we need to have that long-term maintenance piece as part of the budgetary process.
Yeah.
And that was something that came out from almost everybody that was there in terms of their experience.
Well, it's an important point.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have anything incommunicado.
Yeah, nothing for me.
Nothing for me either.
Okay, I'm looking to... All right. So we have, if I can open this, Friends of Trees planting event coming up, and it's going to be in many more neighborhoods this year. You can sign up. So let's see. It's going to be, oh boy, I'm having technical difficulties. The date is going to be on the November 23rd is the date. And I believe I've got two conflicting emails from Saturday. Oh, here it is. All right. So far, they have 50 trees that they're planting. They're shooting for 100. They do still need help recruiting volunteers. And they're inviting the community to join in this tree planting event Saturday, November 23rd. Sign up through the Friends of Trees website, which is www.friendsoftrees.org/OC. And they want folks to arrive at 8:45. I'm trying to find the location. Is it at the Lutheran Church?
Yeah.
Zion?
Yeah.
Thank you. Zion Lutheran Church, so it's been staged out of there before. Thanks to them. It's been great.
Is it too late to sign up, though, I would presume that?
I don't believe so, no. You can, they'll be serving breakfast snacks.
No, signing up for trees to be planted is what I meant to say.
I don't believe so. I think you can still sign up. Yeah. There'll be a potluck lunch for all volunteers after the planting is complete. And then this year right now, the signups, there are 14 signups in Barkley Hills, 3 in Gaffney Lane, no one in Hazel Grove, Westland Farm. Hillendale has 1. McLaughlin is 37. Whoop. Rivercrest, 11. South End, 15. And Tower Vista, 11. So that's a big expansion. Yeah.
Do they indicate what trees they have available, what species?
Yeah, they do. And I believe they will also plant them in your yard, front yard, if you don't have a planter strip.
I see the signs.
They're fairly cheap. I think last year they were going at $35 a tree. And so that's a nice, and they're good trees. They're really quality, so. Plus, Friends of Trees, because this is what they offer the city that we can't do on our own, is education, outreach, pruning, watering advice on the first 2 years, and then they'll check it over that period. Yeah. So that's going on. Thanks. Did you have anything? All right. That's all I have.
So future agenda items. Potentially be.
So, yeah. So Jerry couldn't make it, but he did communicate with me about inviting Audubon. Mary Coolidge is her name, staff person, and she's involved with educational program about how to minimize impacts of lighting, in particular LED lighting on bird habitat, as well as how to design buildings to minimize bird impacts on windows and that kind of thing. So I spoke to her. They're doing it, but they couldn't make it to this meeting, but they would be interested in coming in the next meeting to talk about that. Very busy program up in Portland right now. And so I think there's some pretty cost-effective ways that folks can minimize the use of LEDs in the exterior of their house, but I didn't know what the science behind it was, and she does. So that's one of the issues. And then anything else that we have coming before you, which would include what we just talked about tonight, what else is going on? We'll probably be getting back to you with the status of our comprehensive plan grant application and whether that's we've got, we're going to be submitting that grant through the Department of Transportation. They're helping us with the scope. We hope to be able to dovetail the two grant sources from the Department of Land Conservation and Development and the ODOT Transportation and Growth Management, two separate grant sources, hopefully combine them into one pot of money with one dovetailed scope so that we can manage the project fairly efficiently. And then embark on a pretty rigorous and groundbreaking public involvement process, unlike anything we've ever really done before, because we really want to focus on reaching out to community members who typically aren't involved or don't have the time to be involved. So we're hoping to partner with a community-based organization that has ties to the community already, the communities of color and low-income communities, subsidized housing communities, and those kinds of things that have inroads into the community already and can speak to them with us. And that's going to be taking up a lot of Christina and my time for the next 2 years. So, on top of the other stuff. So I'll update on that, and we'll put, what time, well, we may be getting back to you on Willamette River Greenway and Beaver Creek Road as well.
Updates on the Cove?
Cove, I haven't heard anything right now. There's some property transactions going on that we're not privy to, so, yeah.
So as far as, we have the one applicant today, Christopher Weaver.
Yeah.
Do we have any more, or?
That's it for now, yeah.
Okay, so we waiting, should we wait to make recommendation?
No, you can make you can discuss it and.
Because this will be for starting next year's term, I'm assuming?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, because I believe Matt and Jerry are stepping down.
Okay.
Boo-hoo, sad to see you go. But thank you. Will you be here for the December meeting?
I'll be here for the December meeting.
Okay.
Would you want to take action then?
I mean, I guess we've got quorum today, so I mean, we've got an applicant, we might as well. Unless anybody has any qualms, that's my suggestion.
No, I was impressed by his experience and so forth.
I think he seems, so.
I moved to recommend to the mayor the appointment of,
I'll second that. if we
Okay.
can.
Great. We have consensus?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, excellent.
But we found out we're supposed to actually take the
Vote?
roll call.
Take a roll, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We can do that. Okay, so we have a motion from Doug and a second from Trent to recommend to the mayor the appointment of Chris Weaver to the Natural Resources Committee. And Doug, what's your vote?
Aye.
Trent?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Thank you. Yep. Great.
All right, and I guess we'll adjourn the meeting for November 13th.
Great. Thank you.